Sachs, would you bundle, if you were the CEO of Figma, CEO of Adobe, would you bundle Figma into the Creative Cloud and then just make it one subscription? Would you Microsoft Teams it?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I'm not sure about that. I do think that Microsoft is a little bit unique in its ability to bundle. So Chamath is right about the power of the bundling. What they do is, I think it's called the E5 bundle. They have all these products that virtually all enterprises use, from Office to Active Directory to, there's like a whole long list of them. And so what they've done is they've created one price for all of those products that they sell as a bundle under a wall-to-wall enterprise license. And what they do is when they see a new competitor come along, whether it's Slack or Zoom or Okta, is they'll basically just clone it, create a worse version of that product and throw it into the bundle. And so now every single enterprise is getting the Slack clone or the Zoom clone or whatever for free. And that has a huge material impact on, it pulls the rug out from under those startups. So now that's not to say that Microsoft's product is anywhere near as good as those competitors, but now all of a sudden the Microsoft product is on a marginal basis free. But then what Microsoft does is, every year or two, they go raise the price of the bundle. So basically, they get you hooked on the bundle. They then use it to systematically kill or undermine a competitor. And then they know you're stuck, and then they raise the price. They basically have inflation of the price of the whole bundle. I think it's very anti-competitive, actually. I think it's akin to dumping. I'm not sure what the logical stopping point of it is. Like, I don't know if we can have a healthy SaaS market if Microsoft is allowed to keep doing this forever. Because think about it. I mean, they will just every year, they will take the hot SaaS company du jour, clone it. It'll be a shitty version. They'll throw it into their bundle. And now they're dumping the product in the market. It's basically free. It's free until they basically drive out the competitor or destroy it, or basically undermine its market cap to the point where it can no longer make the kinds of investments needs to pose a real threat to the Microsoft larger entity, right? Yeah. So think about how anti-competitive this is, and you don't hear a word about this from Lena Khan or Washington. They're only focused on social networks.
No, it's so funny. It's like she's more focused on, making sure Amazon doesn't buy Roomba. That, this stuff that's happening.
Or Facebook doesn't buy one VR app. Yeah, it's not a very sophisticated approach. You're right.
This is the kind of stuff that actually really matters. I really think you nailed it on the head, Sachs. It's an impossible strategy to defend against. The other thing that is interesting, by the way, about all of this is, if you think that the valuation, the takeout premium, was basically 2x post to post. What that means is that if Figma was last valued at 10 is now worth 20, does that mean that Canva, which was last priced at 40, is worth 80? Well, potentially to Adobe, right? And if you add those two together now, what you really have is basically the entire totality of the Creative Cloud for Adobe is basically embedded now in these two businesses at an extreme premium. And so it makes it very difficult now, I think, as well, for Adobe to execute a strategy here without it being forced to do some more expensive, dilutive M&A.
Well, and the other problem, Chamath, is this is going to ring bells. So when I said before there were two existential threats, Canva is the other one. And that is the other paradigm shift that's occurred in computing, is that making things radically simple. You talked about it, Freeberg. Photoshop is complex and it's single player. Canva is how people create, any kind of marketing materials today, and they don't hire a designer anymore. The job of graphic designer is now everybody's job. Everybody can make something on Canva. But then I think Sachs or Freeberg, maybe you have thoughts on this. If you're a Lena Khan and they do make a run at Canva, Adobe, now are you saying like, hey, wait a second, you now run the table on all design tools. You can't buy it.
It's a weird classification. It's only called design tools because it was sold to someone that was called a designer before, and that's not the case anymore. Now it's a tool that anyone can use in the enterprise setting or in a small business setting or in an individual setting to create stuff. And that wasn't the case with Photoshop. And I think that's what makes this arguably a very different business, a bigger business, a more transformative business, and a farther reaching business. And I don't think that there's necessarily speaking of the Figma deal, right, a case to be made here that they're preventing the extinction of their monopoly they're buying what looks like a very different business, and it's really additive. It's a business that can turn anyone into a creator. It's really cool.
Well, yeah, but you're kind of speaking out of both sides of your mouth now, because on the one hand, you're saying it's a different business, but on the other hand, you said that this is basically protecting them against an existential disruption to their core business. So if it's an existential disruption to their core business, how could it not be in the same market? Of course it's in the same market.
Well, there are new entrants, competitors.
Yeah,
right?
there are new entrants, and there are, different underlying, technology trends. This is all about cloud, but nonetheless, I don't see how these things aren't competitors with each other to some degree. So I don't know how this doesn't get seriously reviewed by antitrust authorities.
It feels so similar to Facebook, Instagram, and Google, YouTube. And by the way, it's similar in both those examples in a number of ways. Both Instagram was not competing in the same product as Facebook at the time with the news feed or whatever. It was a photo sharing service that clearly created a broader addressable market that got more people to use a social network. And YouTube, people thought they were overpaying, right? And then YouTube, everyone thought it was crazy. They paid $1.6 billion for that business, and it's probably the greatest acquisition of all time. It's been the greatest managed acquisition of all time, I should say. And that business, similarly, I think Google recognized that people were going to move to video content as an alternative to text-based web content, and that it was a bigger picture opportunity than what they were pursuing and in the lane that they operated in at that time. And they were right. And in both cases, it was more about paying whatever it took to get the deal done than, hey, how many users do you have? How much revenue? How much EBITDA? What's your ARR? All that stuff goes out the window when you're sitting in that strategic driver's seat at that big company and you're saying, this is a bigger market. These guys are transforming the market. And ultimately, over time, that will eclipse us. And you can say, hey, you're protecting your business, but really you're protecting your market. I mean, the market is going to go away is what the vision is. Like the market that you exist in today isn't going to exist in the same way in 5-10 years. And that's what you're trying to buy your way into.
I have a question and a statement. The statement is, I think Canva should absolutely go public versus sell, because it seems like they'll have a much easier time competing against whomever that they compete with. I do think that, David, you're right, that there is a lot here for regulatory review, because if you go back and think about Visa Plaid, it's not dissimilar, meaning you have a young startup that has this really credible and viable technology potentially being acquired by, in that case, it was, one of a duopoly. But here you could make a very credible claim that it's in a market where it's roughly a monopoly, because there aren't really that many meaningful alternatives. So I think Sachs is right that there's some,
there's a case here. Yeah,
there's a case here where it just depends whether
that was literally my question.
Roomba or this.
Well, not just Roomba. How about that VR game that Facebook wanted
that was
to
brought up
buy?
before. Like that was a tiny acquisition. They maybe have a million users.
Look,
it seems punitive. They're just being
exactly. They are being punitive. I think it seems
picking
like
favorites. Yeah.
Well, it seems like what the antitrust authorities are doing right now in Washington is they've got a list of companies that they think are putatively suspect. And our job is to stop these companies from accumulating more power. And it's really about seeing everything through this lens of power. But that's not what the competition authorities are supposed to do. They're supposed to ensure competition. It's about antitrust.
It should be a rule book, right?
And the problem with just approaching things in this way of the punitive way, we just have to stop these companies, is it creates a chilling effect on reasonable exits in Silicon Valley. There aren't that many great exits, and we want them to go through. Now, I think if monopolies need to be reined in, there are other tools to use besides just saying that those companies can't acquire other companies no matter how unobjectionable they are. I mean, let's do things like allow side loading. Let's basically
explain what that is. Side loading.
Well, that's basically a way to say that I think Google, the Android already does it, but iOS does not, where you would be able to basically install an app or download an app without going through the Apple App Store. You could enable competitive app stores. Basically, I think it's a real issue that you have operating system monopolies. I mean, Google Android and iOS with Apple, and then Amazon with sort of, white label products. Those are all operating systems that are competing with apps on their own platform. And there have to be some constraints and rules around that. Otherwise, the operating system will eventually dominate and replace any app they want to on the platform. We saw that's what the whole Microsoft thing was about. Microsoft Netscape was 100% about that. So I think if you can show that somebody has an operating system monopoly, there absolutely should be rules and constraints around that. Does it mean the company should never be able to buy anything? No. I mean, I think all that does is stifle innovation without really getting to the crux of what the issue is.
I think you nailed it. A good first step would be allow other app stores. So Google's app store could be on iOS, iOS's app store could be on another platform, et cetera. And the other issue here is Lina Khan's been pretty clear. Her entire thesis in taking the job was, well, I want to prevent downstream competitive issues. So future competition, there's no better example of a future competitive issue and future consumer harm, I think is how she phrases it, than this acquisition. If you're going to do it through the lens of future consumer harm, this creates future consumer harm because Figma is not going to compete with Adobe.
You're saying that it does.
It does massively. I mean, this is the dissonance here. It is great for consumers because they will bundle it. They'll bundle the two things together, and it'll make it more valuable and reduce churn, and it'll make it simple to buy. So that's good for consumers, right? You get more free stuff. But future harm and a future competitive harm here is the marketplace will be less competitive if there's one less independent, strong company in it. If they buy Canva, that's the definition of downstream competitive harm. It'll be a less competitive marketplace with these two companies together. Full stop.
So, Jake, if you're Lina Khan, you actually pay attention to this Adobe Figma thing in like a serious way, or are you still more focused on Amazon and Facebook?
Well, I would hope that they would do multiple things.
What would you do? I'm saying, what would you do?
If I was her, I would create a rule book and apply the rule book evenly and fairly. And this is the problem. This feels very political. It feels like they're going after Facebook because of the downstream political issues Facebook causes, and they're ignoring the Microsoft issue, and they're ignoring issues like this. So it just feels like they have their thumb on the scale.
If you look at what happened to the Visa Plaid thing, it was an enormous blessing in disguise because, the thing went away, and that was, I think, like a $5 billion acquisition. And then Plaid turned around and raised money, and it's like multiple teens billion. And it's going to be a wonderful independent company, to your point, Jason, that will now, create more competition in a space that desperately needed. Now, in that case, that was sort of like financial payments and rails and Visa, MasterCard, blah, blah, blah. But that could also be, if there is a lot of attention paid to the deal and it doesn't end up being consummated, that could be the positive outcome. But
if you wanted future competition,
if you asked me if I was a betting man, I think this thing is going to close.
I think it closes, yeah.
Yeah,
but I mean, Freebird, wouldn't it?
It closes. It closes because it doesn't intrude on the hot buttons of Washington, not because the merits of the antitrust are superior to the Roomba deal or to that VR
Correct.
deal that Facebook wants to have. This is all about political and cultural hot buttons.
It is. It's so weird.
Yeah, but I think we all understand what's really going on. It's all political. But hey, Jason, can I go back to your question? I think it was a really good question, and I've had more chance to think about should Adobe change the pricing of Figma? Should they basically bundle it? I've spoken about the merits of what Microsoft does. I don't think that Figma should do that here, now that I've had a chance to think about it. The reason is this, that you have to think of pricing as not an element by itself, but as sort of the most important element of a go-to-market strategy. And there's no way that you can basically reprice Figma completely as part of some other bundle and expect not to create massive disruption to your go-to-market organization. So for example, you've got now a whole huge sales team at Figma, including enterprise sales. They are commissioned based on the quotas that they close, and that's based on the ACV of the deals and so on. If all of a sudden you price this as being free because it's part of some bundle that enterprises get because they're buying old Adobe, now all of a sudden those salespeople can't earn commission on that sale. They can't be incentivized to take that product to market the same way. The marketing team is tasked with feeding the sales team. So now all of a sudden they're like, well, wait a second. Can we spend money to basically promote this product when it's going to lead to a deal that's priced at zero because the enterprise already has an ELA with Adobe? So you can't just look at a pricing change in isolation. You have to look at it as the tip of the spear of the whole go-to-market. I can tell you what's going to happen because I kind of experienced this with Yammer when Microsoft bought my company 10 years ago. And by the way, I'm not critical of Microsoft at all. They were an extremely high quality acquirer that lived up to all their promises and did everything they said they were going to do. I think if you ever get an offer from Microsoft, you should take it really seriously. I think, like I said, I think they're a great company, great acquirer. But I can tell you what happened is that once Yammer was folded in to the Office suite and didn't have its own independent pricing and didn't have its own independent sales team, it just disappeared. I mean, the promotion of it just stopped because nobody had an incentive to basically go sell it, and nobody had an incentive to go market and promote it. And it just kind of disappeared. And that is why you remember a couple of years after we sold it, Slack kind of came out of nowhere and there was no one to really oppose them because, all the promotional activity we had done around Yammer just ended. Because again, we didn't have the incentive that was created by the sales organization.
Just to explain the pricing thing, David, I think that the way this decision will get made, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it will get made not by the sales teams and not by the product teams, but it will get made by the CEO and the CFO in talking to their largest shareholders. And the reason is because there is an implied cost of capital that Adobe has. In fact, right now, if you look at like all of the models that all of the analysts use, is roughly around 9%. And so, they're going to have to achieve a return on top of that cost of capital. What that means is that they're going to be forced to find a way in short order to make this accretive and to start generating incremental cash flow. And I think that they will be hard pressed not to bundle and not to do these creative packaging strategies, because otherwise I think that there's a risk that this free cash flow machine that folks have become very addicted to at Adobe starts to shrink. And that will have huge ramifications, I think, to the stock and to the executives and to the morale. And so I think that they're going to do whatever it takes. And by the way, you've seen that in other companies who've gone into this phase of their growth, Oracle being the best example. They have consistently found ways to package, to bundle, to cross-sell, to upsell, and they have incrementally walked free cash flow generation up.
If they do that, they're taking a huge risk because here's what's going to happen is, so I agree with you about what may happen. This may be decided by the CEO and the board, but I think if they do this, they could blow it. I mean, Dylan Field, the founder, in his blog post on this said that Adobe's committed to letting them run independently. Well, you can't run independently if you don't have your own independent pricing. You just can't.
Because, for how long is the question? How long does it get to be independent? 2 years, 4 years?
If all of a sudden Adobe salespeople can sell this product and include it in their bundle and the marginal price is basically free because it's part of some bundle, that means the sale has been taken away from whoever the dedicated salespeople are on the Figma side of the house. I can tell you that will create irrationality in the sales organization. And very soon there'll be pressure to consolidate the Figma sales organization with the larger Adobe sales organization. They will be moved in. They may become product specialists or experts, but the go-to-market efforts will be consolidated. And then Dylan's going to end up running a quote standalone version of Figma that doesn't have its own go-to-market organization. And then you don't get the feedback into product from your sales and marketing team. So all of a sudden you're running a product and engineering team, but you don't have eyes and ears in the market.
I hear all of that. I think that the Facebook WhatsApp merger is probably pretty instructive, which is Jan had 2 years roughly where he was left alone to kind of like run independently. And then slowly it was absorbed back into the mothership. And, that was a product with zero monetization. But there was a lot of strategic touch points within WhatsApp and core Facebook app and everything else that they were doing. And I think that you have to do that because when you're spending tens of billions of dollars on something, there needs to be an industrial logic that is beyond just, let me just buy this thing and stick it on the shelf and let it be on its own. So I think that, that die is sort of cast. I think we're just debating the timeline in which it happens.
Let's talk about who got the best
you're probably
deal.
right. And that's what usually happens is when they promise the founder that you'll be left alone, that usually lasts 2 years. That's coincidentally usually the length of the earn out or the golden handcuffs. That's how long my golden handcuffs were.
Yeah.
And they left us alone for 1 year. By the way, our ARR tripled that year. But then once they got serious about integration, the organization started merging. And really, I was just running a product organization, which is fine, but that's not running an independent company because, like I said, you lose your eyes and ears. You lose the pulse of the market when you're not selling into the market.